Welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about struggles and celebrations that leaders and entrepreneurs experience on their journey to success. I'm your host, Kristina, and I'm passionate about helping you achieve massive amounts of success at work and at home. We'll talk about all things people and organizational wellness, share relatable stories, and feature insightful guests because quality people and processes are at the heart of every success story. Ready to learn, grow, and have fun? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Kristina Schmitt. Part of being a healthy leader is being able to grow in virtue. So one particular virtue that I think is the most important virtue of all of them, particularly for leaders, and even if you follow Patrick Lencioni, it is for every single team player. And that is the virtue of humility. So you may be thinking to yourself, gosh, humility, doesn't that mean I give up things and I do without and I don't take control? Doesn't that mean that? And I agree that I used to think that when I was working for a large organization, we had attributes we had to rate ourselves against. And one of them was humility. And I would always have to I would rate myself super high because I was very like, oh my gosh, it's always my fault. And yes, I always take the blame for it. And, feeling like those actions were actually very humble. But really what they actually were in a lot of different ways is actually a form of pride because I was almost ashamed and I was almost embarrassed or I was worried what people thought of me. And so this is where we really get to the real definition of it. So C.S. Lewis says it best when he says, humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. Let that sink in for a minute. So in my actions of always wanting to take the blame and always being concerned for others, yes, that is a virtue to, be concerned for others and their well-being, but to the point that it was because I was over accommodating. I was too much thinking of them, mostly because when I really looked at it deeply, because of I was worried about what they would think of me. So that is a very prideful way to work and a very rocky ground to put decisions upon or to lead upon or to live your life and build your life upon. So we want to really start dissecting that in ourselves and start to understand first, what is humility? Secondly, how are we doing with it? And thirdly, what can we do to increase our levels of it? So I'm going to go through just some background of it, give you some explanation, a little bit more definition, and give you kind of a what does good look like? And then finally give you some very practical takeaways to help yourself, help your team members, help your family members, whatever you want to do, because we all could do some increasing in humility. The first time I want to say that I noticed this difference and this kind of maybe perspective shift on humility was actually when I was a child, but it didn't stick with me, or maybe I didn't like it. I'm not sure which, but it was a bit of a shift. And it was actually from a friend of my sister's. I think my sister was always, we were all kind of raised in the same family, if you can believe it. And we all had this concern with what other people thought of us. And we were worried about it. And so I think she was saying, all spun up about what people would think. And her friend actually said to her, so very wise teenager, I would say, said, it's actually quite vain of you to be thinking that other people think of you so much. And it's like, ooh, ouch. And it really is, because how often are you thinking of other people and that one thing that they did to you that 10 years ago? and I have to admit, I still hang on to those things. I mess up somewhere and I still think about it all the time. So that is we need to let go of those things basically, but no one else is thinking of those things. Those are not top of mind when they think of you because they're not defining. And to be so obsessed with what others are thinking is a very vain way to live your life and very unhumble. Let's explore it a little bit more. So a lot of us will think, so the opposite, so first of all, the opposite of humility is one of those seven deadly sins of pride. So it is that pride. So when most of us think of pride, we think of this big ego, overconfident, magnanimous, kind of maybe gregarious is the better word, sort of person. So magnanimous, I'm learning a new definition for magnanimous, so I don't think that's what it is, but this gregarious, kind of like big person, right? Big personalities. And we would always say this person is very overconfident, right? But really, that is one form of it, right? It's that ego, that big ego. But the other side of it and the other way humility or pride can show up is what I've just been describing, and is that overthinking of self. You can almost call it vanity. So if you're a Bible reader and know your Old Testament, Saul's fall was his vanity and that pride, because he was so worried what others would think of him, that he would, hurt. Like there was a story where he, I think the priest or whatever they were called then, he was late. The prophet was late. And so he started doing this blessing that only the priests are allowed to do. And it was because of this lack of humility and worry that people would say, oh my gosh, what's happening? This is awful. So he took control and he did it. And it was this grave sin that he did, because he did this thing that he was not allowed to do. Also, if you kind of think about the whole story with him and King David, he was worried like he wouldn't be king anymore. He wouldn't be raised up in everybody's head. So he was trying to kill David. So it's like that pride really got in the way, and it was the death of him, literally. And so it can be horrible. And that's why it is one of the seven deadly sins. But when we talk about it in our work and we think about both the big ego and this over concern with what others are thinking, when we think about it in both ways, they're both actually stemming from the same thing, which is actually an insecurity. So many times when people overcompensate with too much pride, it's because they're worried someone's going to, right? They're going to find out I'm not any good at this, or I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to show up and be really big and tell them what to do and not listen to anything, because that's the way that I can show that I know what I'm doing. So it is actually stemming from a level of insecurity, which it's just funny to think about when you think of overconfidence and that worried about what others are thinking too much. They're both stemming from the same root, which is interesting. So when you come down to it, the solution is actually the same, which is kind of cool, because it's easy. We can fix it either way. So let's think about the damage that a lack of humility can have on a team, whether it's from the leader or whether it's from a team member. So if you're thinking about it from a leader aspect, somebody who's not humble, they might not be listening to everyone around them. They're, maybe a mistake is happening and they don't want to change directions because that would look shameful to other people. So they're going to have this overconfidence level. So that can be very damaging to the team dynamic and to the team confidence, and really the empowerment and engagement of the team, because it's like, well, he's not going to listen to me anyway. I'm going to bring up this problem, and no, this person's not going to my leader's not going to listen to me. I keep saying he, it could be a she too, right? But my leader's not going to listen to me anyway. So why would I mention it? Why would I bring it up? Obviously, they don't care. So that's one way it can damage. But the other way is that somebody who's maybe too concerned or maybe not confident in their own direction or decisions, it may impact them that they might change direction too soon, right? Like they're like, this is the way we're going. And then they start looking at everyone not believing them. And then they see, oh, maybe it's not the right way. And so they're not having that drive and that hunger to push the goal all the way to fruition, despite the hardships they might bump into. So that lack of confidence can hurt both directions. We can keep going too long with something that we shouldn't be. Maybe we should have veered left a little bit, or we're going to veer left and right and left and right, and we're not going to have any level of direction. So either way, not good, not going to get us to where we want to be. So let's talk about, well, I'll tell you my personal experience. I was more the second story, right? So I speak a little bit from, my own experiences, that I was always afraid to a level that I was over accommodating to people and over accommodating to the voices that I would hear, because I wasn't confident in my ability to have a good idea or to lead the right thing or to lead the right way. A lot of times, reflecting back, I was comparing myself to like all the other people that were doing my job, and they were very different from me. So I was always judging myself and having this like, ooh, I'm not right. Ooh, that's not the same. And so it led to a lot of insecurities, but also I had a lot that I brought forward from my childhood. So this, we'll find this with so many things, like so many obstacles, so many roadblocks that get in our way of developing or of succeeding or hitting a certain goal. It will stem from a thought that we have that we generated or we formed when we were a child. So, as I mentioned, my sister also struggles with this. Um, but I was the youngest of three girls. So there was a lot of, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Just, be quiet, or a lot of like laughing at things I would bring up or my thoughts or my ideas. So I kind of had some preconceived, oh, I'm going to be ridiculed thoughts. So again, this is what kids do, right? But it will still form a thought. So it's important to try to bring those out. So when we're trying to overcome things, if we don't bring those sort of thoughts out of us, we don't understand them, we're not able to judge whether they're fact or fiction, because not all of our thoughts are true, believe it or not. If we don't really make sure that we understand if it's fact or fiction, then we're always going to be stuck. And being stuck, that's not the path to success, right? If you're stuck in the snow, you're not going anywhere, right? So we want to continue to move forward. So again, you might be questioning, how can this humble person, this humility, be a successful leader? It still might not feel right. So if you've read the book Good to Great, and I highly recommend it if you haven't, because it is very, very impactful into how you think about things. But he's studied many, many organizations. So he called them kind of top organizations, and he sorted them out on levels of success. And it was a sustained success, so not like an instant success. And what he discovered, and what he kind of boiled it down to, is that the leader is extremely important, which is, if you listen to all my episodes, you've probably heard that, but also that he classified the very successful leaders as a level 5 leader. And they encompassed many, many things, but some of the biggest kind of virtues or characteristics about them were that they were this calm, somewhat reserved leader. So it's not that big gregarious sort of leader that we think, like that person who's going to take control and be like that animated, charismatic speaker. And he noted that in his research that a lot of the very charismatic leaders weren't as successful in general. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was something else, but they weren't as successful as these level 5 leaders that exuded this confidence, but a calm, knowing your direction, steadfast, humble confidence. So there is research that proves it. So go read some Jim Collins, and you'll see it. Not all of us embody this ability to be this calm, steadfast sort of personality. So I, in fact, do not. We are all wired a little bit differently, but what we can do is we can increase that confidence, and we can lead with the confidence in our own way by increasing our levels of humility. So humility will help us in every aspect of our lives, because without it, we can't grow, we don't learn, and we stay stuck. So this will help. All right. So what it really looks like, as I've said, that increasing of humility, it actually is an increase of confidence. It's an increase of confidence in yourself, but also in the higher power, so in the Lord, in his plan for us. If you want to hear a little bit more about that, I do have a podcast around hope. So it's a couple podcasts ago. It's called Hope for the New Year, or Hope and Goals, or something like that. But it describes that balance between confidence in self and hard work, and confidence in the Lord and the plan, or the greater power, that there is something wonderful coming. So there is a balance there that this humility embraces, and this humility allows us to have. And so that's a big part of it. It's increasing in that virtue, that general virtue, decreasing on your reliance of yourself, So when we're not humble, when we're very prideful, we will see our successes very much due to us, due to me, because I did it. And our failures may be due to us too, but we might cover them up or we might be worried about them, but everything is due to us. It's not necessarily due to our team. It's not necessarily due to a higher power. It's due to what I did and what my actions were. So being able to say, it wasn't me, it was God, or it wasn't me, it was my team, those are very humble things that will help us in the long run. So, and it's also increasing that confidence of your team, which allows you to rely on them to do their jobs. So many leaders struggle to delegate. And a lot of it is because they're saying, well, I'm going to do it this way and that's the right way and it has to be done my way. So there are many things we can do about that. We can increase our level of trust in our team members, but we can also develop processes that will enable it to be the proper way to a certain extent. You may have a style, a way of treating customers or clients, or a way of behaving that you can put through in values and processes that you can now gain trust because you know you can trust them to behave in the way that you expect or you want them to. So what are some practical things to do? Because again, we can all work on it. I am still very much trying to grow in my virtue of humility. So we can all grow in it. So these are some practical takeaways for anybody and everybody. But first thing we can do is we can start with some experiment. Okay. So this is actually something that Patrick Lencioni rolls out in his book, Ideal Team Player, where the 3 virtues of an ideal team player are being humble, hungry, and smart. So if you're great read, so have a read through it. But he describes this level of experimentation, which is really just trying on the behavior. So backing up just a little bit, I've talked about this in the past, but I'll reiterate it for this because there's so much around our thoughts that drive our behaviors. So there is a connection between thoughts, behaviors, and results. So there's feelings that are in there in the middle. So we have thoughts that are created when we are young. Those thoughts, they generate a feeling inside of us. And so these feelings that we have are going to really make us act a certain way. So behave a specific way. And when we behave a specific way, we get a certain result. And then those results reinforce or break the thought. So what we want to do, so when we think of this as a circle that all just keeps cycling, we need to disrupt some of them. We realize we can't really disrupt our result because our result is a result of our behavior. So we can't do that. And the feelings are hard because they're generated from the thought. So the thoughts we can change and the behaviors we can change. So this first one is actually driving on the behavior. So we want to experiment and practice behaving in a specific way. And what that will do is it will give us a different result and challenge the thought. So that can be very powerful and very helpful. However, you may need some support in that. So support in making sure your behaviors are actually correct. They're feeling genuine because again, when we try behaviors on, they feel weird and they might look disgenuine to team members, teammates, that sort of thing. So we want to make sure that we maybe get some feedback. Are we being genuine? Is it weird? Are we doing it right? That kind of thing. Or are we acting out of our natural tendencies and doing it the old way, right? So getting some help from your team members, which is a practice in humility right there, whether you're the leader or a team member, it is a big practice in humility to ask for that kind of help. So also another experiment. But you also might need support from your leader and from your coach or a coach because it's hard to behave against those core beliefs, right? Those thoughts that we talked about. So that's method 1. So the idea being we're going to practice this behavior and create a new habit or rewire our brain to rewire the thought that we have to get the more natural tendency to act humble. All right, so that's one way. The second way, this one affects the thoughts and also our spiritual beliefs and spiritual wellness, but pray for it. So they always say when you're struggling with a sin or struggling with something like a 7 deadly sins like pride, to pray for the opposite virtue. So we pray for humility. A very, very powerful, I'm going to say gut-wrenching prayer to do is the Litany of Humility. So I will leave a link below for a copy of that, but if it's the first time you've ever read it, it will hurt. For a while, I was I was reading it every single day and it hurt less. And I feel I was acting in a more humble fashion when I was doing that. I would like to get back to it because I still struggle quite a bit with my pride and worried about what others are thinking and all of that stuff. So it is so helpful to continue the practice of praying for that level of humility. And a really great way, because it helps you define humility really well, is that litany of humility. So I cannot say that enough. And the third way, and I always say something about this, but gain an understanding of yourself. So the more we understand ourselves, and this is strengths, weaknesses, geniuses, frustrations, there's motivations, there's strengths from strengths finders. So all of these things, as well as working to understand those thoughts. So our wounds, our deep-seated thoughts, those things that keep us stuck, that is going to help tremendously. So a lot of times what I will actually find is that when you try to do the experiment and you can't, and that's because you need to actually back it up to the thought, because the thought and the feeling that thought creates is so much bigger and more negative to you than the reward that you might get from behaving properly or in a more humble fashion. So, or the way you would like to behave. So we have to sometimes back into those thoughts. So that understanding of yourself, and I found understanding my geniuses and actually more understanding my frustrations to be very freeing in this level of guilt and this level of insecurity that maybe me not behaving in certain ways created. So that level of vanity and pride. So it helped me reduce that vanity, being able to say, these are my frustrations and they're going to be hard and that's okay. And it was almost instant relief. So I cannot stress that enough of understanding that, but you can get a very similar thing from something like the motivation code and understanding what are your top motivators, what are your bottom demotivators, because when I've understood that, it was very freeing as well. So those are some really great ways to really grow in it and to really back into those thoughts that are keeping us stuck and making those experiments fail for us because we're stuck in those thoughts. So pick one of those, pick all three of those, implement something. Okay, so I'm going to recommend one because I always recommend one at a time. Try an experiment this week. Maybe pray that litany of humility a few times this week and see what happens. Measure it, see what happens, track it, whatever you need to do, but just pick one and start growing in humility. So as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a comment if you're on YouTube or leave a review, because leaving a review helps the algorithm and it helps get that message out to everyone else, because if we were all just a little more humble, this world would be a wonderful place. So if you liked it, share it with a friend, subscribe, again, leave the review, and I will see you on the next episode of the Business Building Blocks podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Business Building Blocks podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. If you found value in our conversation, please leave a quick review, like, or share. It helps us reach more amazing listeners like you. For more resources and insights, visit KristinaSchmitt.ca, where you can find tools and support to empower your leadership journey. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.